Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Now I've got a little bit of a different setup here. I'm not at home doing this video, but I had a lot of an enormous amount of people asking, could you please show us how to do the pattern that's in your Macintosh Show? That pattern, how can we do it as a rectangle blanket, where you could either do it as a square or you can do it wider and do it as a throw or like a blanket for your bed or anything. So I'm going to show you how to do this pattern as a rectangle. You can do the chain as long as you like, and there's no corners in it except for when you do the border. I've done a very simple border of a UK treble crochet around the edges. I've done 2 rounds. You can do this ladder pattern around the edge if you want. At the corner, as long as you've got 2 stitches, 2 chain and 2 stitches in the corners, then I've done my UK treble crochet. That's a double crochet if you're in the USA, all around the edge, and it's came out absolutely beautiful. It is beautiful. So I'm going to show you how to do this very simple pattern as a rectangle blanket. So you're going to do your chain in sets of 4 and do it as long as you want it to be, as wide as you want your blanket. Do as many sets of 4 as you want. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'll do a little sample to start off with this. So I've done my sets of 4. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add on an extra 2. 1 and 2. So we're going to go in to the 4th stitch. Count 1, 2, 3 and 4. Into the 4th stitch. And we're going to put a cluster. So that becomes my 1st stitch. That's my 2nd stitch. Now into that same stitch, put 1 more. So I'm going to chain 1 and skip 3. 1, 2, 3. And into that 3rd stitch, 4th stitch, sorry, put a cluster. 1, 2, and 3. If you're in the UK, these are treble crochets, and if you're in the USA, these are double crochets. I'm going to chain 1 and skip 3. 1, 2, 3, and do a cluster all the way along. Now what you're going, this is what you have. Now I've got, this yarn has glitter in it, so it's a little bit shiny. I'm going to chain 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 and turn. Now into the chain stitch, not the space, into that chain, 1 chain in between these clusters, I'm going to put another cluster. Into the chain stitch, 1, into the stitch, 2 and 3. Chain 1 and move to the stitch in between the 2 clusters, into this, not the space, into the stitch, into that stitch. Chain 1, not chain 1, do 3 stitches, do your cluster, then chain 1 and move to the next chain 1 here. And that's what you'll do all the way along your work. And you're going to do 5 rows. So I've done my last cluster in that chain stitch. I'm going to chain 1 and to the top of this cluster, into the corner, I'm going to put 1 UK treble crochet. That's a double crochet if you're in the USA. I'm going to chain 3, not 4 this time, only 3. 1, 2, 3 and turn. Now I've got a space there and I want to put, it's going to be cluster and a space, then a cluster. So I need to build a cluster in this space. And that chain is my first stitch. So into that space, we're going to put 2 more, and that makes my first cluster. Chain 1 and skip to the next space. Into the chain in between the space, do your next cluster. We're working in the chains. 1, 2 and 3. Now you can use any yarn and use the hook size it tells you for your yarn. I'm going to chain 1 and move to the next stitch in between the clusters. So in the chain 1 that's in between these clusters, and build my next cluster. 1, 2 and 3. Chain 1 and work along to the end, and that is going to stagger your granny stitch. So I'm at the end, I'm going to skip that cluster, and in I've got 4 chains here. So I'm going to count 1, 2, 3 and in to the stitch next to the cluster, into that chain 1. That's a chain 1, and then that one works as a treble crochet. So count 1, 2, 3 and into the 4th stitch on this one, I'm going to put my cluster. And 3. So what you have is a cluster, a space, a cluster. And the same at this end, a cluster, a space and a cluster. So we're going to need a space next to work this way. We're going to chain 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now it's 4 because we're going over to this space. When you do the cluster, you don't do 4, you only do a chain 3 here to do the cluster. But when we're creating a space here, we do 4. So just rewind the video and watch these rows again. So into the chain, the 1 chain, chain 1 that was there, and do your cluster. Chain 1 and work along. You'll do that until you've got 5 rounds. So on this one you can see I've got my cluster, my space, my cluster, my space and my cluster. And I've done 5 rounds. Now what I'm going to do now is I've got a bigger sample here now. So I'm going to do my chain of 3. 1, 2 and 3. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do what I'm calling the ladder. We've got 5 of the granny cluster and then we've got the ladder just like we did in the shawl. So it's 1 full row of UK treble crochets. If you're in the USA, that's double crochets for you. So 1 into each of the stitch, including that chain 1 in there. So that's my first stitch. So 1 into the next stitch all the way along. I'm going to put 1 into each stitch. 1 UK treble, that's a USA double, into each stitch. Now remember that chain 1 stitch there. And I'm going to put 1 into the top of that chain of 3. I'm going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3 and turn. Now into the next stitch I'm going to do a treble crochet into the top of the stitch, and we're going to do the ladder stitch now. So I'm going to chain 1, skip 1, move that down there. So I've done my chain of 3 and I've done 1 stitch into the next stitch. Chain 1, skip 1 and do a treble crochet. This is a double crochet if you're in the USA. Chain 1, skip 1 and treble crochet all the way along, and that makes that ladder stitch, like a fillet stitch, little boxes along. So we've got 2 on the end, then it's chain 1, skip 1, treble crochet. Chain 1, skip 1, treble crochet. Chain 1, skip 1, treble crochet into the stitches all the way along. Skip 1, chain 1, skip 1 and treble crochet into the next one all the way along. So I've got my ladder row done near to the end. I've got 3 stitches left. So skip 1, I'm going to put 1 treble crochet in to that second last stitch and then 1 into the top of that chain. 1 and to there. I've got 2 together here and I've got 2 together at this end. And then in between I've got chain 1, skip 1, do 1, like that, all the way along the top. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3 and turn, and I'm going to put 1 treble crochet into each stitch. I'm going to copy that row. So we've got 5 of the cluster rows. So we've got 5 of the cluster rows and 3 that makes up the ladder row. Then it'll be 5 of the cluster row and then the ladder one. So turn around and into each stitch put 1 UK treble crochet. That's a double crochet if you're in the USA. 1 into the chain stitch, that chain 1 stitch, then 1 into the next stitch, all the way along. 1 into the chain stitch, and 1 into the stitch beside it. Now my yarn's got metallic thread all the way through it, so my hook is catching on it. It does it no matter what hook that you're using. So I've got my last 2 stitches. I'm going to put my treble crochets in, and that's my ladder round finished. So now we're going to start the cluster round again. So I'm going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3 and turn. Now into that same stitch, I'm going to put 2 more treble crochets. I'm going to do a cluster. I'm going to chain 1 and I'm going to skip 3, 1, 2, 3 and do a cluster. That's 3 stitches into that one. Chain 1, skip 3, 1, 2, 3 and do my cluster all the way along. So I've done my chain 1, I'm going to skip 3, 1, 2, 3 and into my last stitch I'm going to put my last cluster. It's 3 stitches into that one. So we need a space above this one. So when you've done your cluster at the end, your next one will be a space. So you need to chain 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 and turn. So that becomes my treble crochet on the end and my chain 1. So into the next chain stitch in the space, the chain stitch in between these two, I'm going to put my next cluster, and we're going to do 5 rounds. Just like I showed you on how to do these cluster rounds. I'm going to chain 1 and skip to the next chain 1 stitch and put my cluster in. And when I get to the end, I'll put my cluster in here, I'll do a chain 1 and I'll do 1 treble crochet into this last stitch. Then I'll chain 3 and turn and start my next cluster. And that is how it looks. I'm going to do some more of this. So to do the 5 cluster rows, just go back to the video and you'll see how to make sure you do the ends, space, cluster, space, and then you'll do your ladder row, which is 3 rows in between, and then back to your 5 cluster rows. And that's how you do this pattern that was on the shawl as a rectangle blanket. Make it as long as you want and do it in sets of 4 chain. You chain in sets of 4 and you'll start with a cluster. Chain 1, you'll skip 3 stitches and you chain, then do your next cluster, chain 1, skip 3 and do your clusters all the way along and you'll finish your last stitch on a cluster. So just rewind the video to the cluster round. Then you'll do the 3 rows that make up this ladder. And that's the pattern on the shawl that I did with the Macintosh hand-dyed yarn. It's the same pattern. So everyone was asking, how do you do it as just a rectangle, just a blanket that's like this without it being as a triangle? So I'm going to show you how to go around the edges of your blanket to give yourself a border. I'm just using a treble crochet. That's a US double crochet. At the corners I'm putting 2 stitches, 2 chain and 2 stitches in at the corners. So the way I've been doing it up the side, I'm just picking up 2 stitches in the chains, 1 into the top of the cluster just to keep it even, and then 2 into the chains. You can go around it, it's nicer to go through it. Just go through the stitches and then 1 into the bottom of this cluster. Just do it evenly. Make sure you've got the same amount of stitches down that side as you has the other, and the same at the top and the bottom. Now I'll show you what I do when I got to the corners. Just going through here, and that keeps your little space when you go through the stitch of the chains. Put 1 into that cluster. Get that correct. I hope you can see this. I'm not in my own house, that's why that's why the camera's different. I'm not in my own house. So when I've got to the corner up here, I'm going to put 2 in. 1, 2. I'm going to chain 2, 1, 2, and 2 more into the corner, and that will bring it around the corners. And then along the top I'm going to put 1 into each stitch and 1 into that chain space, 1 stitch into each of your little cluster and 1 into the chain stitch, and that should give you a nice edge. And you'll do that all the way along. So I'm nearly back around to where I started. Now what I did was, when I done my last set of clusters, when you want to finish your blanket, do your last set of 5 rows of clusters, and into the corner of your last cluster, you'll put 2 stitches, 2 chains and 2 stitches, and that will make your very first corner. then work your way down the side, and then do your corner the same way when you get to the bottom of your size of blanket. So I've got all the way along the top, and I'm just going to slip stitch into this edge here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to chain 3. So I'm going to chain 3, 1, 2 and 3. Now into the next stitch I'm going to put a treble crochet, and that brings me to that corner there. I'm going to put 2 stitches in this corner, 1, 2, chain 2, 1, 2, and 2 more in that corner. And that's how you do the corners of a blanket. Now I'm going to work my way all the way down the side to this corner, and I'll do another corner, 2 stitches, 2 chain and 2 stitches, then work my way around, all the way around my blanket. I'm only going to put 2 rows on my edge, and I do once again apologise for the light. I'm not in my own house, so I've had to sort of rig up a camera, and that's going to give you that really pretty Macintosh shawl pattern in a blanket, and it is a really pretty stitch. So I'll get that finished and I'll show you what it looks like once I've got my square done. Now you can make your square bigger, like I said. I'm just doing a little comfort blanket for my granddaughter Abby, just so she can carry it around and cuddle into it. So I went around for the second time. Now what you can do is, you can do that ladder stitch and then do 2 more of your plain stitch, or you can even do the ladder stitch in between just to finish off your whole blanket. I should have did that to begin with, but I've done this one now and I'm not going to take it out. So I'm going to slip stitch to the one I started with, and that's that finished. And that is how to do that pattern that everyone asks for, that I did in the shawl as a square blanket. Well, you can make it as big as you want. You don't have to do it square. It's not done in the square like a granny square. It's just done like a rectangle, and you can make it as big as you want. And this is how it turns out. Absolutely beautiful. I need to straighten it up a little bit there. It turns out really, really pretty. Now this, you might say, is a small size, but like I said, this is just a little cuddle blanket for my granddaughter. But that is how you do that pattern that was on that Macintosh shawl as a rectangle blanket. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, and if you click on the bell icon, YouTube will tell you when I put up another tutorial. So until the next time, happy crafting, and I'll see you all again soon. Goodbye.